Welcome to EJ and Title VI Underserved Populations Guidance. In this second lesson, you will learn about the processes ODOT follows to ensure compliance with relevant anti-discrimination policies. For most users, this lesson takes about 1 hour to complete. The guidance provided in this course is intended to assist ODOT district environmental staff, consultants, and local public agencies, LPAs. These standards must be followed for all categorical exclusion, C1 through D3, EA, and EIS environmental documents. Additionally, federal-funded LPA projects that require the preparation of an environmental document also must follow this guidance. Let's begin with an overview of ODOT's processes for complying with protections established in relevant anti-discrimination policies. Click each topic to learn more about compliance requirements, backgrounds, and methods. Then continue to the next section. ODOT must follow certain legal requirements for compliance. First is avoiding, minimizing, and/or mitigating disproportionately high and adverse effects to EJ populations, disparate impacts to Title VI populations, or impacts to other underserved populations. A second requirement, which is essential to achieving the first, is providing full and fair participation in the transportation decision-making process. The final overarching requirement is to incorporate the directives of all relevant anti-discrimination legislation in project design, implementation, and maintenance. ODOT's compliance processes were developed by the Office of Environmental Services. These processes are followed by both environmental staff and consultants, who must adhere to them when preparing all environmental documents. ODOT has published a resource titled Underserved Populations Guidance to provide assistance. ODOT conducts thorough research to identify and assess impacts to underserved populations. Data for EJ populations, Title VI populations, older adults, and LEP populations are gathered from the Transportation Information Mapping System, or TIMS. ODOT learns about project-specific demographics through public involvement efforts, which we will discuss at the end of this section. There are two parts to ODOT's compliance process: underserved populations analysis and involving the public. These are completed concurrently, not sequentially. However, we will be discussing them separately. Underserved populations analysis consists of 5 steps. Depending on the project, not all steps are completed. Determining the level of analysis and required documentation is Step 1. In Step 1, ODOT determines whether the project is exempt from detailed analysis according to one or more of the Appendix B criteria listed in the Underserved Populations Guidance. Always consult the Public Involvement Manual to identify what public involvement activities are required, even when a project meets exemption criteria. The next task is assessing what documentation is required. This is based on the environmental document level. Click each button to see what you need to do for each environmental document level. For C1 level projects, no mapping from Transportation Information Mapping System, TIMS, is required to be uploaded to the project file. Minimum public involvement, PI, requirements per ODOT's PI manual must be followed. For C2 level projects, complete Underserved Populations Form for C2 projects included in Appendix C. Then upload it to the appropriate project file in EnviroNet under Underserved Populations, Project Information. Select the drop-down option Underserved Populations Documentation Form and check Part of CE. TIMS mapping is also completed, and a PDF copy of the map is uploaded to EnviroNet under Underserved Populations, Project Information, Census Mapping. For D1 level or higher documents, environmental staff or the consultant must answer the questions listed in the guidance. Depending on the answers, an Underserved Populations Impact Analysis Report, UPIAR, may be required. PI requirements must be followed in addition to answering questions and completing TIMS mapping. If your project is not exempt, you proceed to Step 2, which is using TIMS to identify whether underserved populations are present within the proposed project or study area. You will also initiate public involvement, which we will address later. Let's walk through how to use TIMS. This process is explained in ODOT's Underserved Populations Guidance if you need assistance. First, from the home screen, click on Map Viewers and then Environmental. Next, click on Projects in the Layers box on the left. Select All Project Points and All Projects Linear. Next, click on Filter Data in the blue ribbon above the Layers box and select Filter by Attributes. In the Where field, click on the first drop-down menu and type PID, then select PID_NBR. Move to the second drop-down and select IS as the operator. Next, in the third drop-down, type in the actual project identification number and click Search. If the system indicates that it is missing inputs for one or more filters, go to the top of the Layers box. In the Select Features From drop-down, select All Projects Linear. Repeat these steps. In the Where field, click on the first drop-down menu and type PID, then select PID_NBR. Move to the second drop-down and select IS as the operator. Next, in the third drop-down, type in the project identification number, PID, and click Search. Now click on Set Visible Layers in the blue ribbon to return to the layers. Click on Projects and unselect All Project Points and All Projects Linear. Next, collapse Projects and scroll down to click on Demographic Indicators. Under Demographic Indicators, select Minority Population, Low Income, Linguistically Isolated, and Over Age 64 to activate these layers. The map changes with each added layer. Next, click on Identify Features. Now, click a block group within the project area. Using either Print Screen or the snipping tool, select the whole mapping area and include the Layers box. Save the image as a PDF. Next, you need to upload the map to the project file. Save it to Census Mapping in the Project Information folder within Underserved Populations. Be sure to check Part of CE. Note that C2 level environmental documents require completion of the Underserved Populations form for C2 projects in Appendix C of the guidance. Upload this form to the project file under Underserved Populations, Project Information, Underserved Populations Documentation Form. Also check Part of CE. You may be wondering why individuals with disabilities were not included in TIMS mapping. The reason is that TIMS does not currently have this capability. Therefore, ODOT uses other methods to determine whether they are present in a study or project area. Pull back the cover to learn more. ODOT consults community stakeholders and public service entities that may be aware of individuals with disabilities who require special accommodations. The project area may hold clues, such as wheelchair ramps, facilities that provide assistance to individuals with disabilities, road signs, and more. Metropolitan planning organizations and other agencies may also be consulted. In addition to determining the presence of underserved populations, ODOT checks for the presence of public housing and/or Section 8 and HUD properties. To determine if these properties are located in a project area, review the Section 8 housing website for current listings. If it is determined that public or Section 8 housing exists and could be impacted by the project, coordination with HUD and the local public housing authority or private entity managing the property is required. When coordinating, include at minimum the following information: purpose and needs statement, project mapping, impacts to any public or Section 8 housing, and, if applicable, measures to avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts. Finally, remember to always document coordination and results of coordination in the appropriate project file in Environet. Also, an Underserved Populations Impact Analysis report must be completed if disputes to public or Section 8 housing cannot be resolved. Once underserved populations have been identified within the proposed project or study area, ODOT must make a determination regarding the proposed project's impacts. This occurs in Step 3. Underserved Populations tab questions are meant to aid in the assessment of whether the proposed project will have a disproportionately high and adverse effect on EJ populations, disparate impacts on Title VI populations, or negative impacts to any of the other underserved populations. Avoidance, minimization, and/or mitigation may be necessary if it is determined impacts will occur. The Underserved Populations tab will only be visible for D1 to D3 projects. Before we walk through these questions, let's address a couple important guidelines. First, if you think your project may have an impact on an underserved population, you should coordinate with OES as early as possible, even if Environet does not indicate that a UPIAR is required. And second, contact OES if a UPIAR is required or if you need guidance to answer questions. Question 1 concerns relocations of residences and businesses. You will need to know whether housing of last resort is anticipated. Use data from TIM's mapping and public involvement to determine whether a business primarily serves an underserved population and whether relocating the business will cause job loss. Question 2 is about access. You will need to know whether access to shopping, bus stops, schools, jobs, recreation, community centers, and other resources will be diminished or completely restricted. Impacts to community cohesion are also addressed. Access to or use of the transportation improvement is accounted for as well. For the remaining questions, you will document the details of negative impacts raised during public involvement activities. For question 3, you will document unanticipated additional impacts to any underserved populations. For example, the public make us aware of an impact that was not anticipated during project development. Question 4 is about disproportionately high and adverse effects on EJ populations raised during public involvement. An Underserved Populations Impact Analysis report is required if the answer is yes. Question 5 concerns possible disparate impacts to Title VI populations raised during public involvement. In the Title VI legal manual, the U.S. Department of Justice stipulates that disparate impacts are adverse effects resulting from a policy or practice that fall disproportionately on a race, color, or national origin group. The manual further classifies such adverse effects as either disparate treatment, intentional discrimination, or disparate impact, caused by an action independent of any intent. Question 6 is about unique factors that could impact LEP individuals, older adults, or individuals with disabilities, including access and safety issues. An Underserved Populations Impact Analysis report is required if the answer is yes. After completing all questions, if Environet does not indicate a UPIAR is required, your final task is completing the remarks box of the Underserved Populations tab in Environet. Public involvement efforts to actively engage underserved populations should be discussed in the remarks box. Click each button to see the approved language you must use. After completing the remarks fields, you will add the statement you see here to document that the UPIAR is not required. If applicable, you will also upload supporting documentation to the project file under the Underserved Populations or Public Involvement sections. Note that not every project will have this type of documentation. Click each button to learn more. The results of Step 3 determine whether the UPIAR is necessary for the project. If the UPIAR is required, it is completed in Step 4. Let's walk through how the report is formatted. The UPIAR is prepared to determine whether there will be disproportionately high and adverse effects on EJ populations, disparate impacts to Title VI populations, or impacts to any other underserved population. It also documents avoidance, minimization, and/or mitigation measures. If it is required, contact the ODOT OES policy section, which will make the final determination regarding whether the report must be completed. Depending on the context and intensity of the project, the UPIAR may be completed as an inter-office communication, IOC, also called a short report, or as a full report. The full report includes a more detailed discussion of impacts. Each follows the same format. The OES policy section will work with you to determine the correct format and how to complete the UPIAR. The UPIAR consists of 7 sections: project description, summary of purpose and need statement, summary of underserved populations data, discussion of impacts to underserved populations, public involvement summary, discussion of avoidance, minimization, and mitigation measures, and summary. Click each section to learn more. In the project description section, you will include the exact wording that was used in the environmental document. For purpose and need statement, you will summarize the P and N that is included in the environmental document and reference the full P and N statement. For underserved populations in project area, you summarize the results of the efforts to identify underserved populations that may be impacted by the project. For underserved populations impacts discussion, you will describe in detail the impacts that have been identified through the questions answered in EnviroNet and conducting public involvement activities. Such impacts include number of residential relocations, whether housing of last resort is anticipated, number of business relocations, and number of businesses primarily serving an underserved population. For a full list of impacts that may be addressed in this section, refer to the Underserved Populations Guidance. In the Public Involvement Summary section, you will describe how underserved populations were included in the public involvement process, state whether or not concerns related to underserved populations were raised during the public involvement process, and discuss these concerns and the responses ODOT provided. Additionally, you need to include these concerns, comments, and responses related to underserved populations in an appendix. In discussion of avoidance, minimization, and mitigation measures, you will describe other alternatives and whether or not the impacts were different for each alternative to show avoidance. Any mitigation or enhancement measures included as environmental commitments, and temporary impacts, access changes during construction, maintenance, and other factors. Finally, the summary should recap the report and include a final determination regarding whether or not the project will have a disproportionately high and adverse effect to an EJ population, a disparate impact to a Title VI population, and impacts to any other underserved populations. The summary must include justification for the determination, a summary of impacts, and positive outcomes. Finally, after completing steps 1 through 4 as applicable for the given project, you complete the project file in step 5. Let's see what that means. Completed UPIARs are submitted to OES Policy Section for review and concurrence. Full reports are uploaded to the project file under Underserved Populations Reports, where you will select the drop-down option called Underserved Populations Impact Analysis Report. For short reports, select the option called Underserved Populations Impact Analysis Report, Short. Once it has been determined that the report meets all criteria, OES Policy Section uploads the approval IOC under Underserved Populations Coordination UPIAR Approval. After approval is uploaded, the Underserved Populations Identification and Impact Analysis process is complete. You just learned about underserved populations analysis. In this section, you will explore how ODOT ensures full and fair participation for underserved populations that may be affected by transportation projects. Let's get started. Public involvement is important for both ODOT and affected communities. It allows the public to give ODOT input on issues affecting them and is a means for linking cultural, social, and economic needs. During public involvement, ODOT utilizes techniques that increase participation and interaction. And finally, public involvement activities help develop valuable community partnerships. Accordingly, ODOT has the following objectives for public involvement. Identify issues not previously known through research. Identify potential issues and controversies. Identify opportunities to mitigate impacts. Develop viable transportation solutions that address community needs. ODOT has general standards for outreach that guide the public involvement process. Let's examine them now. There are 8 principles for effective and compliant public involvement. Chief among them is the provision of early and continuous PI opportunities. ODOT must also give the public reasonable access to project information, as well as adequate notice of participation opportunities and time for review and comment. Public involvement activities must be held at convenient locations and times. Additionally, graphics should be used to convey inputs and outcomes of the planning process. And whenever possible, public information should be available electronically. In official responses to public comments, ODOT must demonstrate how such comments were taken into consideration. Finally, ODOT must seek out and consider the needs and input of traditionally underserved populations. Click the button at the top of the screen to view the general standards for ODOT's public involvement process. When you are finished, click Next to continue the lesson. Now let's explore customary methods used to reach traditional PI participants. In general, these are the main customary methods used to reach traditional PI participants. These do not necessarily meet the needs of underserved populations. Let's turn our attention to strategic engagement methods used to meet the needs of underserved populations. ODOT uses strategic methods for reaching underserved populations and eliminating barriers to participation. Click a group to learn more. After examining each, you may continue to the next section. Strategic public involvement for older adults may include the following: scheduling meetings during daylight hours, giving presentations at regularly scheduled meetings at senior centers, assisted living facilities, or community centers, using large print on publications, and using closed captioning with audiovisual presentations for those who are deaf or hard of hearing. Strategic public involvement for low-income populations may include the following: offering multiple meeting times and locations to accommodate work and childcare schedules, holding meetings at locations along public transit corridors, and making literature, announcements, etc. easily accessible. Strategic public involvement for individuals with disabilities may include the following: meetings at ADA-compliant locations, closed captioning and/or textural versions of audiovisual materials, volunteers to assist with physically navigating facilities, sign language interpreters at meetings, audio-only versions of print or audiovisual materials, digital publications like websites that are accessible to people with multiple types of sensory and/or motor disabilities. Strategic public involvement for people with limited English proficiency may include the following: using visuals like maps, pictures, graphics, etc., not just sound and text, translating announcements, brochures, presentations, etc., for those whose primary language is not English, providing a language identification chart, working with foreign language media to share information via print, television, and internet news, keeping language as easy to understand as possible at no higher than an elementary level, and avoiding figurative language, for instance, idioms like "give your 2 cents." Strategic public involvement for minority populations may include the following: working with community organizations to identify and determine best outreach methods, working with community leaders to help lend credibility and trust, conducting face-to-face meetings, posting information in frequently visited locations and venues, distributing materials in person at community gatherings and marketplaces, being proactive and creative with outreach methods. In addition to the methods you just learned about, ODOT reaches underserved populations in other ways. Strategies used to notify the public include notification letters, signs in affected communities, distributing and posting flyers in high-traffic areas, including public transit vehicles and stops, mailing lists for project newsletters, announcements in community newspapers and non-English publications, TV and radio spots, especially on ethnic media and public access stations, recruiting and educating community leaders on the transportation development process. When appropriate, ODOT may take a more personal approach by canvassing affected communities and partnering with community groups and stakeholders. Click each button to learn more. Canvassing involves teams of ODOT personnel and/or consultants entering affected communities to speak with individuals at their homes, businesses, and gathering places. The goal is to notify them about the project and participation opportunities. When canvassing, always wear a badge and supply contact information. Community groups and stakeholders have deep knowledge about community values, needs, and issues. They influence their communities and can promote interest in projects and public involvement opportunities. Accordingly, when appropriate, ODOT utilizes citizens' advisory committees to receive public comments and provide information to affected communities. Let's finish public involvement by summarizing key points. You've learned a lot about how ODOT upholds protections for underserved populations when developing transportation projects. To conclude this lesson, we will work through some questions about 2 case studies, the 3rd Street Bridge in Dayton and the Opportunity Corridor in Cleveland. Are you ready? Here we go. The 3rd Street Bridge in Dayton will be replaced due to deterioration and related safety risks. The bridge spans the Great Miami River and has historically divided east and west sides of the city since 1904. U.S. Census data from 2016 revealed that the project area west of the bridge has a minority population of 88% and a low-income population of 80%. To the east, the figures are 40% minority and 55% low income. Based on this data, what did ODOT do next? ODOT concluded that the bridge replacement will not cause disproportionately high and adverse effects to EJ populations. There would be no relocations, no negative alterations to access, and no other factors were identified that would cause disproportionately high and adverse effects. However, ODOT did complete an Underserved Populations Impact Analysis report. Why do you think the report was needed? Public involvement efforts revealed a history of racial and economic division in Dayton, with the 3rd Street Bridge playing a significant role. However, many community members expressed hope that the replacement could mark a new era of cohesion by symbolically and physically promoting connections between East and West. Take a moment to read quotes from PI participants above before continuing. Based on feedback from the public involvement meeting, ODOT concluded the new bridge design must avoid furthering perception of the bridge as a barrier separating West 3rd Street from the overall city. Participants also expressed a desire for more multimodal transportation. How do you think ODOT responded to these considerations? Here's the last question about the 3rd Street Bridge project. In which section of the UPIAR should details about aesthetic treatments and multimodal transportation be recorded? Nice job! Let's work through one more case study, the Opportunity Corridor in Cleveland. Are you ready? Here we go. The Opportunity Corridor project in Cleveland is much larger in scope than the 3rd Street Bridge project. Its purpose is to improve the roadway network within a historically underserved and economically depressed area. The Opportunity Corridor is a unique project covering an approximately 3.3-mile new location in an ultra-urban area. Approximately 100 relocations have resulted from the project. The public within Opportunity Corridor expressed concerns about pedestrian safety and making their community more secure. How do you think ODOT addressed and mitigated these concerns? The Opportunity Corridor community was concerned that the construction of the highway would further deprive them of services they badly needed. They had concerns that the highway was being built in their neighborhood, yet the project would not benefit them. How do you think ODOT addressed and mitigated these concerns? Since the Opportunity Corridor project would result in direct impacts to EJ populations, temporary and permanent impacts to access, and concerns about community cohesion, ODOT was required to fully explore mitigation measures. With the implementation of these measures, ODOT was able to ensure the critical elements of the EJ Executive Order were satisfied. How did implementation of mitigation satisfy requirements under FHWA Order 6640.23a? Congratulations! You have completed this lesson on how ODOT complies with EJ, Title VI, and other legislation protecting underserved populations.